as SOE, SOC. So we're really encouraged by that. And if you look at, they'll have this overview, if you can read this, it is something that is service learning based, experientially based, which we've also are not too secret agendas that we hope that the universities are playing will think about the possibility of creating an identity among these learners for undergrads. We're in Washington, D.C., a better place. We could brand ourselves as a service learning and experiential learning school in contrast to our what the other Georgians, as they call it. Then, so over to you, Lauren, the next one.
So we want to give you just an introduction to why we did this and what our goals were. We were inspired by the retirement of a beloved professor at SIS named Paul Wagner. He retired in 2021, but remains in contact with us. And he's really committed both to environmental stewardship, environmental studies, and sort of community-based engagement. SIS also divided into departments. And so we started in fall of 2023 at the new department. And, the faculty of the department got around and we were thinking, what do we want to be as a department? What can a new academic department be about? And we sort of formulated a mission and a vision for ourselves, which included the defense and care for a life learner for our research, teaching, advocacy, of policy work. And we're each committed to that. Our faculty are also all committed both to global issues as well as local issues. And we try to teach students about the world through engagement with our local community. And almost all of our faculty have both local and global research and advocacy places. And this also sort of built on the expertise of our faculty. So many of our faculty are involved in activism and advocacy here in Washington, D.C. And so we wanted to be able to platform their existing expertise and desire to do more activism plus scholarship, practice plus theory. So taking what they're teaching inside the classroom and applying it to the real world. And we were able to sort of focus this in on experiential learning and service, community-based service learning with the help of offices here. So the two overarching goals for the Earth Scholars program in particular, to a lesser extent the certificate program as well, is to foster belonging among our undergrads, to bring them into community with each other, to give them an opportunity to collaborate with each other, with faculty, and with people in the DC area, to provide students an opportunity to do field work. So to get outside the classroom, literally, and you'll see they literally get their hands dirty because a lot of it is in agricultural fields. And they're building what we think of as sustainable partnerships with local nonprofits. I think about half of the faculty in our department had partnered with local nonprofits and done CSLP 1 credit add-on courses. But it was really a struggle to manage these partnerships between semesters. It's hard to get anything meaningful done within the course of 14 weeks. And so we saw this as an opportunity to build sustainable partnerships that last more than one semester. So that's also the goal. And then we were hoping to sort of build this community of practice of students who are committed to community-based service learning, as who have experience in it and who can do it going forward. And we saw this as, building on the mission and the vision of our department, which is the defense and care for life undergrads and everything living thereon. So those were our two basic goals. Then, and just go over.
Okay, so actually, the Venn diagram, we'll kind of pass over this lightly, but student learning at the center with service, content, critical reflection, and certainly the partners, instructors, the students. Having done some CSLP in immersion before, you get or you learn as much as they do. It's really great. Let's go well, should I keep going? I can keep going. Just to tell you a little bit more about sort of how we put this together. It's going to be 21 years, 21 students in the inaugural cohort. And we're going to have an orientation next week at the early, which will be an overnight. We'll discuss our service work there. And then a book, What If We Get It Right, which is by Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, which is available for your reading pleasure from AU libraries. So if you're interested, I highly recommend it. The sophomore year curriculum will be this introductory course. It will be taught by our colleague Garrett Grabbing Lovelace. Some of you may know her. She's very active in agricultural movements, particularly, which is why early is great. And our partners, as you'll see, our agency partners tend towards that way, and I think that over the years they will expand. In spring, they'll take a methods course, which will be taught by our faculty colleague, Maria de Jesus, who is a global health scholar and also an activist. And they have piloted these courses last year before the cohort, and you'll talk more about that. Junior and senior years, they'll take 300-level courses and 400-level capstone. And the AFW certificate, which we also have as part of this, will require just 2 additional courses. I will, as I'm the undergraduate faculty coordinator in my department, so it's up to me to approve them as long as they're relevant to the themes of community sustainability and service. And they have to do an additional CSLP credit during through a nonprofit. So, Nina.
So we wanted to go through some of the process, and then at the end, I'll mention a couple challenges. The NPC approval process began in spring of 2024 for something that's only in fall of 25 getting started. And that's notable. So it takes a long time. And I'll also say that the courses were piloted in academic year 24-25 that are rolled out officially as part of the Earth Scholars curriculum this year, 25-26. We had an initial challenge of this not having been approved officially at the university and not arriving in the catalog when we actually needed to be advertising it. And so Vicky and I visited 100-level big seminar courses, Introduction to International Studies, SIS 105, for example, and SIS 106 courses. So we had to get out there and tell people ourselves what this looks like and just trust the process that it was going to work out. Shayla and I created the website content, the flyers, etc. It was really critical that we had literature ahead of their arriving on the catalog. We also worked closely with the first year academic advisors. It's critical that they understood not just what new courses at the 200 level and 300 level were being offered, but the whole sort of 3 years this would sort of take for students to get. So, it's unusual because they're not used to sort of advising beyond sort of single courses that faculty want to do. So this was an added challenge. We did have a work study student, Sade Goodrich, who was helping. She had taken the course as it was piloted with Garrett Lovelace in the previous year. So she's able to answer questions to students. So she came to events and things. She's great. We have relied on help from others on campus, in particular, Melanie at the AU Center for Leadership and Community, awesome, and Sagar Gupta, who's also showing up to talk to students, and then they're going to show up at the orientation. That's been amazing. Reverend Eric Doolittle, who's here right now, the university chaplain, is going to help. And I think this is because we imagine this being important intellectually and for their understanding of environmental studies, global health, and development issues. But also, we hope it means something to them. We hope that it's a transformative experience. And in the pilots of these classes, I think building relationships with real people out there in the world, in Washington, D.C. during this work has been transformative for students.
Cohorted into the same class, it takes a bit, and you have to have that in place before you start, as we realized. And then there's the time to process the changes. The EPCs work during the calendar year, and nothing appears as reality until, the July 1st catalog gets published. And so there's always a lag in your innovations and your experiments, and when people can actually see that become reality.
So, and just to add to the last slide, we did have application. They filled out written application, and then we interviewed each of them, and then also got them together in formally cohort. These are partners at the moment, and really an amazing group of people. From seed savers of kind of, historical, sort of culturally sort of first scenes to, people that actually work in the farm justice space. It's a really important, very engaged group of folks. So then we will see the reps at Airly next week. We have a talk. Students can get, as I understand it, they choose, they have a certain amount of agency in this. That's really up to Garrett. And they chill. I assume that people do want to participate into one institution or another. She'll figure it out. But it worked really well. Sade, who was our ambassador, for example, she actually came to us and volunteered to be grants. She volunteered pilots, which so I'm saying that.
That's it. I just want to add one other thing. I have to say that the community partnerships, courses, everything rests on faculty expertise and drive. And so, this is because this is what Eric, Rodney, Lovelock, Maria, that is already are doing. This is what we're already here for. And it lives only as long as, and is only as strong as the faculty who make it work. So it isn't alignment with what we were already doing. It's just making it visible and cohesive for students across 3 years of their undergraduate. Thank you so much. Any questions? We do have a microphone out here so that you can raise your hand, have a question, and then somebody will bring you. Okay. So look at the time. It's a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, it's full 30.
I'd be curious to know if any of the other academic units had a cohort bringings for undergrads that there was money that looks like, I'll do. I just know SAS more than the other academic units.
There are multiple one in Columbus or in my budget. Can I be able to fund the new Bridget about that? Really should be. Bridget Troutman, Dean of Undergrad Education and Academic Student Services. So yes, all of the cohort programs. So, and no matter where they are, they do work to get their online things. So yeah, and just tying back, because I know not everybody's at everything, but Tuesday there was a whole kind of student success summit. One of the things we talked a lot about this belonging. And we're not at an enormous place, but we're also not a tiny place. It's a cohort program of a number of different varieties, provide that student belonging, they kind of home for that their knowledge. So I'm great enough.
Hi, I'm Marianne Noble in the Department of Literature, and I'm teaching a course on literature and the environment. But I'm just curious if you're interested in any tie-ins across campus.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Can you send us your syllabus for start? That'd be fabulous. Yes. But
Gary, just want to say, we have students at CAS and beyond who are in their scholar. And so, I think it was a balance between mandating that students take our FAS courses and allowing them to come from other units and going with this group of people. So we settled on a compromise, which is they're only taking a core classes with us. And then their 300 and 400 level courses are taken elsewhere. So essentially, the 300 level literature course and a good channel. The what?
Yeah, it's a holiday one.
We should be more curriculum in your class to put on it. It's all have firsters and ours that are really, in line with this. We would love to come and talk to the class and get information about coming over.
You should.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell the timing of when you look for applications and typation?
Right. So we met applications for
student sophomore years in January of their first year. So January 1st through 31st, I think we had the admissions were submitted through a Google form. And then we just wanted to make sure that students were intentional about it. And so we did talk to each of them. But we didn't, and they did have a room in their schedule to take a couple of elective courses. But students will typically have their first year seminars and their other 100 level introductory courses by the time they enroll. There are two more difficult things about it. One is a prerequisite for our 200 level courses is having SIS 1 to 5 introduction to international study. So the CAS students in particular, they have met that requirement in a different way. I have one of them, I think, took 1 of 5, SIS 1 of 5, but others have counted other courses they've taken at home or in a transfer institution to meet that requirement. And then second, in order to take SIS 3 of 6, they need an introductory research class. And so we're going to be flexible, especially with non-SAS majors, to ensure that there are ways they can meet that introduction to research kind of requirement ahead of the SIS 306. But, those kinds of details were, I think, the challenge of putting this together. And I also am really grateful to the EPT at SIS who helped us think through some of these challenges. It was really, really helpful with the equity.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Carolyn Parker. I'm from the School of Education. I'm a science educator. Now, I'm just thinking, are there students who are interested in possibly science education, teaching, formal, informal, to be Bridget, and citizen science, right? And maybe there's a potential habit of mind, science communication, right? I think about all this and center up in Stony Brook. Just wondering, what do the students think they're going to do? I don't want to tie it all to workplace, right, and outcomes, but what do they end up thinking about a career, things like that? And are there some more synergies across the break? I'm kind of in my typical style and thinking and talking at the same time.
No, that's good. One right started. I think that's a great question, and there should be synergies across the campus. And the idea of citizen science, I think, is a great suggestion for them. One thing that we'll do with them at the early retreat is we'll ask them to reflect on themselves starting out. What are they good at? What are the things they want to do? These are 18-year-olds, so they probably don't know. But I mean, this is something that should be next, as well as literature, fun. It's the, you need, I mean, as somebody, I decide that I make them read great writers in our field, like, the 20th century, but also 19th century, like Young Thoreau, Aldo Leopold, and Gray, Rachel Carson, and people like that. There's power in mindset. And someone like Carson is a perfect example of someone who wrote really well and compellingly. She did science for the federal government here. And, apparently walked Glover Park in her birding adventures, as I understand. She's quite local. But I think the synergies, yeah.
I also feel like this list of community partners, this is mostly immigration and agriculture and food related.
Yeah.
Because of the expertise of our faculty. But the model folds if you have different faculty. And I think there's the possibility of developing these more sustainable community partnerships where students have the opportunity in sophomore through senior years to stay involved with individual organizations. We do have one student who came in as a first-year MA student, got involved, Laura Levin, got involved as a TA for the pilot programs, and she's now had an internship. She's looking at working at one of the organizations. And in previous years, Garrett Roddy Lovelace has developed OCD, and she's had undergrad students who've gone on to work in these organizations after graduation. And so it has the potential for being an employment opportunity, which shouldn't be ignored, but at least internship and real experiential learning.
Thanks. I'll pull over talk.
I had a comment on his Rachel Carson. I'm not sure if you were that you're exam the museum out by the Rachel Carson mural near her home. That might be another opportunity for
That's a great idea.
Any other question? All right, so then if you can, there's too much Carol. What you know, me, I know what he's when comes to you started the Bible flowers. All right, please stay everyone. We have one more award to present. I'm doing sorry. You're gonna read that on. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the announcement. So the Milton and Sonia Greenberg Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Award recognizes AFW who have made a significant contribution to the scholarships of teaching and learning, or SOTL, as they also call it. That is research in which they systematically assess and share their teaching practices. And this award is made possible by the late Milton and Sonia Greenberg. And I'm excited to announce that the 2024-25 winner is Alida Anderson from the School of Education. Alida was selected for conducting and widely disseminating extensive research in the pre-service teachers' perceptions of dyslexia. Using qualitative service analysis across multiple universities, she found that even with extensive coursework, myths about dyslexia persist that stem from popular media's incorrect descriptions of dyslexia. The findings of Professor Anderson and her colleagues have changed the teaching practices by explicitly focusing on myth busting in classes on dyslexia for pre-service teachers so that these future educators can effectively advocate for their students once they begin leading classrooms of their own. And so now I'd like to welcome Alida up to the front, and please join me in congratulating her for her. Yeah, and we're going to switch to your appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, is that an drum? Okay, as we did. Yes. The can't be scary. Okay. Yeah. And then Jana did this with Carmen. Right? Yes. Okay, super. And awesome. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, everyone who's here. And also thank you for the recognition of this wonderful award. I'm a professor in the School of Education. I've been here since 2009. I do work with pre-service teachers, both undergraduate and graduate students focused in the area of learning disabilities, but all of special education. And this work is really focused on looking at the relationships between our pre-service teachers, and I promise not to acronymize you to death, but PFG's dyslexia knowledge sources and misconception. And I was going to do something pithy, like asking people, what do Theo Huxley, Bella Thorne from the Disney Channel, Percy Jackson, and what do those characters have in common? They got them, yeah. And just fun down. Yes, the Queen Percy Jackson is just one. Yes. Okay. So they not only have dyslexia, or the characters do, but they also portray the prevailing myth about dyslexia. So if you have some worry about, maybe you call this myth, don't worry, you're not alone. But the overview that I'm going to talk about and the work that I've been recognized for is really focused on teacher education and training at 3 different universities. And we're focused on PST's dyslexia knowledge sources and misconceptions. And really the goal of this work is to improve our teacher preparation program, specifically in training teachers about dyslexia. And just some little bit of background about dyslexia. It's the most common learning disability in the U.S., and it involves difficulties with reading words, both in isolation and within text. It also involves phonemic awareness, a fancy way of saying it's mapping the sounds of a language to their letters, and rapid naming, which is auditory memory based, and writing. So writing challenges accompany some challenges for people with dyslexia. And dyslexia misconceptions have been studied 2012 was one of the earliest studies. Kelly McDonald, the work that she and Laura Rapp and I and some other folks did in 2017 was one of the largest studies of a U.S. population, about 10,000 people. And we found that among the public pre-service teachers, as well as people with high self-reported neuroscience education backgrounds, that they endorsed the myth of dyslexia, among other neuro myths, at alarmingly high rates. And that has been studied and replicated by Kristen Betts and colleagues. I've been involved in that work where Kristen is at Drexel, and she and our colleagues have been working to look at myth endorsement in higher education instructors and course designers. And they found some of the same patterns of endorsement as the McDonald study. Just so we're clear, there are lots of myths out there about dyslexia. The most common and persistent one is that dyslexia is visually based, that it involves backwards reading. And you might even go back to some of your earliest days. I remember 1984, there was an ABC after school special, if you're that old like me. Joaquin and River Phoenix were in a special called Backwards, the Riddle of Dyslexia. And it opens with floating letters on a cereal box. And I believe it was maybe River Phoenix looking at it. Point is, it's language related. It is not a visually based challenge. Doesn't mean that people with dyslexia don't make transposals, but it's also important to note that people who do not have dyslexia make transposals. And so it's not something that is a causal factor for dyslexia. The biggest problem with the misconception is it delays and oftentimes misguides intervention, really important and necessary intervention for dyslexia to students. And it also can be a problem for parents and family and teachers as well. So some proposed solutions over the years, I've looked at online learning modules for dyslexia, and as of 2020, none of the modules out there that we identified dispelled the myth. One of the questions that we asked that relates to this work are, well, maybe it's the distance between education and the neuroscience of dyslexia. So we did some work creating a module that addressed the science of dyslexia, and it did have some effect, but not necessarily on the general public, because the disciplinary knowledge for science of dyslexia was too far from the background knowledge. There's also been some work done on using refutation texts. So LTA colleagues did some work that showed students, okay, this is information that's correct about dyslexia, this is information that's not correct. The challenges there, ironically, is that there's a high reading demand level. So people with dyslexia wouldn't necessarily have as much access to those kinds of intervention. And shockingly, despite coursework, our students still adhere to myths, even when they've taken, and this we replicated in 2025, the earlier work by McDonald et al. And so we've really started looking at the sources of misconception. And the research that we're doing now is really focused on conceptual change through misconception sources. And so our project has been looking at how and why misconceptions originate and persist, but then also really guiding pre-service teachers and teacher educators about dyslexia knowledge and their sources to foster the conceptual change. So we're looking at critical media inquiry and analysis, a very fancy way of saying, looking at clips of media and identifying where there are incorrect portrayals of dyslexia that we think and that we're testing will foster conceptual change over and above the didactic textbook presentation dyslexia. Not to say the didactic presentations of dyslexia are not important, but in and of themselves, they have been resistant they have not been helpful in changing these myths. So the initial questions were, what's the accuracy of knowledge about dyslexia?
and what are sources of dyslexia. We were looking at relationships between both knowledge and sources. We did mixed methods across 2 universities. We were looking at, our data was coming from research teachers with new responses, and we were thematically coding knowledge sources and myth endorsement. And what we found in 2024 was that our pre-service teachers had surprisingly high knowledge accuracy for things like characteristics, dyslexia, lifespan, prevalence. However, they explained the characteristics of dyslexia using the myth of backwards reading. And overwhelmingly, popular media was a source of dyslexia knowledge, but our pre-service teachers also reported that they got their information from friends who had dyslexia, family members, and coursework. So again, we saw in 2024 this pattern that even when students reported having courses in psychology and education, they still reported the myths. Troubling. So in 25-26, a study that we're presenting in the fall at Interdimensional Dyslexia Association with more different demographics of increased sample size that and some mixed methods finding. We pretty much replicated and extended the previous study in 2024, and in 25-26 this year we're going to be extending to AU. So in preliminary analysis, our pre-service teachers, there's a little bit more of a spread in their knowledge of dyslexia across different categories, and less accuracy about definition, characteristics, screening, and instruction. And consistent with our other previous findings, they use the myth to explain the cause of dyslexia caused by backwards reading. And the knowledge sources, the pool of knowledge sources was increased significantly in this study, but popular media and coursework were the most commonly or frequently reported. And popular media definitely was the most frequently reported. Knowledge sources, our findings are showing that the knowledge sources absolutely are related to inherence of dyslexia. So some of the things that we're piloting this year, and hopefully our paper will be out by next year, but this idea of critical media study to foster knowledge restructuring. And we're also undertaking a scoping review of the role of popular media in pre-service teacher dyslexia myths. You'd be surprised to know that we've gone back as far as the early TV to see the ways in which dyslexia has been portrayed. Although unfortunately, because of funding limitations, Nielsen will not allow us to access their database for less than $10,000. So we're really doing, I think, IMDb and some other the past 10 years of film and video and TV. But the work that we're undertaking with our undergraduate students, with our pre-service teachers, and some of our grad students who are pre-service teachers, is really focused on short form video content, so reels. If you're an old person like me, I need to know, like, okay, what is a reel? It's, it's a TikTok or whatever it is on YouTube. My 15-year-old is constantly telling me about different types of inaccuracies in reels, and it's fascinating. Now that he is alerted to that, he calls it out all the time. And he said, Mom, I never even saw that before you started talking about all this stuff. That to me was like nonsense before you connected it to video, which shows me that this is the context in which I'm teaching my students, and I need to be really aware of what it is and how it is and what it did to their world, to my students' world. And so the short form video content reels are really what we're going to be helping students to not only identify myths and having them identify the myths, but then create short form video content that dispels the myth. And so what I'm hoping, and we're hoping as teacher educators, is that it fosters student self-reflection about existing beliefs and knowledge sources, and potentially teacher educators as well. And also more broadly, we're extending this to stigma narrative in popular media along many other lines, but very specifically in disability and deficit types of narratives. And I think it's really important for us to think about how becoming more aware of pre-service teachers in those sessions really requires me as an educator, teacher educator, to examine my own instructional practice, so that, you know, I'm not creating a big divide between what is academic and what is popular media, but that we can really use these contexts, this information together to improve our instructional practices and make them responsive to our students, and also to actively design learning opportunities with our students to challenge dyslexia myths as well as other harmful stigma narratives that my students at least are teaching me about every single day. And they need, and they are looking for ways to express them and challenge our systems. So I think lastly, I'd like to say that doing this kind of work around countering misconceptions about dyslexia supports conceptual change, but it really means that it makes improvements to students with dyslexia and their families. So changing these misconceptions has a direct positive effect for students with dyslexia and their families. It also helps our pre-service teachers. Carolyn, I'm glad that you mentioned job marketability, but our pre-service teachers then have these advocacy skills in place so that when they go out into schools, they can revise the deficit narratives and support asset-based practices, which our schools and communities are so much in need of. So that's the gist of it. This little slide, sorry for the typo, but this work has been going on since 2014 when we started neuromyths research. Myself, Lauren McGrath, and a colleague at Harvard, and really, so it's I don't want to portray like the myth busting and this, or what I'm doing now is just out of the blue. It's really been collaborative at its core, and so I just want to extend that information to people. And I'm I feel very privileged to be working with such wonderful colleagues. And that's it. If you want any of the references or the papers, happy to share them. That's Linda.
Thank you so much, Alida. Questions? I have one. Different and stuff. So really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing so much detail about your research. So in dyslexia as language phase, what does it look like in other languages?
Yeah.
And then are there similar myths?
Okay. So first, I'll take the first question first. The short answer is yes. But there are some differences, and the differences, the work that I've done has looked a lot at Chinese tone, so tone languages, and and this is earlier work that I did, so my brain's not as sharp on it, but what we looked at was sound to symbol processing and what is shared in the sounds of, say, tonal languages like Chinese and Korean with U.S. or Germanic languages, where the tones are, it's not necessarily tonal, but it's phonological, and there's different stressors. And so what we found is that kids with dyslexia or native Chinese speakers, Korean speakers, have challenges with different tonal processing, similar to the phonological processing of English speakers. We also see that there are some other kinds of, short-term memory challenges, things like that, visual processing or visual memory across different languages. But in terms of across the languages, we can see a core sort of sound. I'll just use it in layperson's terms, the sound of language and how it maps to the symbol. Now, of course, Chinese and Korean are logographic languages, right? So they don't follow an alphabetic script. So that introduces a whole other set of variables in the differences between dyslexic Chinese speakers and dyslexic English speakers. And so that's where you'll see across the world's languages. There's some really interesting work that was put out by Peggy McCardle and some others to describe dyslexia in dual language learners and people who are multilingual language speakers. And what we've seen over time, which is so important to know, is that language learning just in and of itself has some form of protective benefit because you gain more insight about language and about the ways that sounds work in languages. So that old adage of, exempting kids with dyslexia from language class, it's actually not really doing service. In fact, do it. And now we know about language structures in the brain that we know that the more of that is better for language learning. So I love your question. I could talk about it for hours, but I know this. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? Yeah, right. It's actually just a comment about this. So my child has dyslexia, and we're a multilingual household, so we speak 3 languages in the house. And at first, they wouldn't diagnose her because they said, "Oh, she speaks multiple languages. Therefore, this is a problem with processing the different languages, learning, blah blah blah." And we were living in France, and then they told us that to stop all other languages and only focus on French. Once she was diagnosed, it was actually the opposite. They're saying, "No, you need to just focus on the French because she has dyslexia. It will, cause problems later on." And I find that this is maybe one of the myths. That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely one of the myths. And so I really love to get a copy of the paper once down. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm happy to send you more information. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, good. Maybe more of a connection. So, and then we're attracted, Dean of Undergraduate Education and Academic Student Services. So I know you probably know this, but other people as well. We do have a learning services program here as part of our disability support that is specifically for students who have language processing issues, and they're part of the cohort. And I totally agree, right? Not opinion, because it's effective in the literature. Don't just tell students, "Oh, they don't have to take classes in language or writing or math. You find alternate ways." And so, we do have this program here for AU students that's very, very successful. But I might also reach out, see if you might want to do some professional development. Or if you have worked with Nancy Sidner, Greenberg, he's their director, but I'll connect you. So that could be a really good thing to do together. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, and maybe I have a question too. And I cannot remember where this research is, but there are some students who are diagnosed with dyslexia in college because even though they're fluent in language and all the things, there's an additional plateau and a different level of reading and processing. Is that true? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are a lot of, we humans are incredibly resilient, right? And so when people use the term compensatory strategies, whatever the environment that the person was in, they may have developed a set of strategies that served them. And especially if disability is stigmatized or not valued or not given resources for, there wouldn't necessarily have been any reason for them to self-identify or reach out to get a label of dyslexia. But I think a lot of times when we see the demand change at university, then it becomes very clear that the person had these challenges. So that's an important lesson for faculty, that sometimes if students are struggling in a class who are absolutely academically capable, sometimes there is something where they have been using a compensatory strategy for undergrad and for grad as they move from being undergrad students to grad students. So this is a place for these. Absolutely. But anybody want to share any of the places where they've seen the dyslexia myth or where they got it in their own experience? They've seen it in popular media.
It's never basic, Alida. I mean, I think about it. I'm a high school teacher in education. And when I think dyslexia, I think the inversion of symbols, and it was only through my own education with my daughter, because she was multilingual and she had some challenges early on, did I self-educate about dyslexia, right? But that was, within the last 10 years. right? But my understanding as a teacher, as a high school teacher was, you just get there and learning, 3 and 9 or 9 and 6 or, whatever, and just reversing symbols. But it's much deeper than that. It's all through culture. I can't even think of, I can't even identify where I would think of it.
And well, maybe now once you all have heard this, you'll see it out there and write me, send me an email. I just, the last thing I'd like to offer is this idea that, the media also has a role in portraying something that is not harmful and that is helpful. And it's shocking to me that the 1984 after school special was re-aired in 1989 and used as a education tool, right? For teaching people about dyslexia. So I feel like that's another really, it's a big system that we have to confront, but I think it's a really important one.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder many teacher ed programs use that.
exactly, right? Exactly.
I wonder if you have more general conclusions about what are met. We live in an age of information and disinformation, and I always feel like what you're describing could be qualified as myth and even misinformation to some degree. But we all have lived long enough in academia to realize that there's also what we just call paradigm shift. Where there's research and corroborations and invalidations, and we're smarter 10 years later. Let's hope now. We're smarter 10 years later or 20 years later because research like yours is being done, to understand what is actually behind it and what is sort of the going rate in academic among the science. And I want what I'm asking you to be careful about and how you would define more broadly what is a myth, where is truth, where is misinformation, where is invalidation, where it's just, sort of plain good old paradigm shift.
Yeah, I think it's an important question. And I think we really got at it in our 2017 study because we intentionally called these myths and neural myths. So they were misconceptions about the brain and learning. And so those were myths. And I can't even remember how many of them there were that we were looking at. But we were very specifically identifying what literature dispelled the myth and how science has dispelled that, those myths, neuroscience in particular. And so one of them is sugar makes you hyper. It's one way. Another one is if you're there's cholesterol, right? No cholesterol. Yeah. So, but these are all very specific about the brain and learning. But I do think your point goes to this idea of ideology, right? And the ideology of even of what a deficit is. We have a tremendous responsibility now, and even then, but before the paradigm shift of thinking about disability as a deficit to now disability as a difference. And so that, to me, is a paradigm shift. Some people might argue that is not true. And so I think that your point is really well taken, that depending on that, although I would argue that it's my truth that it is a difference and not a deficit, because I believe in 15 adapting right. And so, and that's where sort of I fit. But that's an argument and a conversation that I get into with my pre-service teachers, because a lot of them come from places where they haven't been able to talk about the struggles they have in learning, or the challenges they have, or a different way of seeing something as, right, wrong. So it's a big question. Awesome. Thank you so much. So excited. As you can tell, got all that activated on this. I'm curious a little bit. One thing that really stood out to me was the super low scores on the knowledge of intervention, service, diagnostics, things like that. I'm a health person, global health background, HIV/AIDS doc, and just trying to sort of curious a little bit. we've been really successful in some areas of public health interventions where you're pairing addressing, trying to correct myths or conventional wisdoms with not so much the why, but what to do about things. And somehow the combination of the concept with the service actions that matter or practice actions that matter seems to transform folks' willingness to not just grapple with the mist, but to move past it. So for example, who gets HIV in DC, grounded in a 1980s portrayal of who was getting HIV in DC, kept doctors from offering testing and kept people from asking testing and perpetuated stigma. So yes, we myth busted, provided updated data and snapshots of who was affected with HIV now and didn't know about it. But as part of that, went straight to the service access lines as well. Because frankly, the people who held the myths also didn't know the service access. But putting them together somehow transformed both in different ways. So I'd be curious about how you're putting them together, thinking about putting those together in future intervention. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Tell me your first name again. Shannon. So Shannon, I love your question because it really ties together Gerald's point about, marketability, like what are these people going to do? It also ties to your presentation, the earlier presentation about experiential learning, because what I've seen over this research with pre-service teachers is that generally speaking, the ones that have not been out in the field yet really had a really low point of contact with things like intervention and service provision. Now, you might expect that, but I think the point is that we also need to be thinking about simultaneously getting our students into these experiential opportunities to work with students. And so one of our initiatives is built in around having our pre-service teachers work in the TC reading clinic and having them much more highly sensitized to what does it actually mean to do intervention or to do screenings, those kinds of things. And so that's now happening at the undergraduate level, also at the graduate level. And then furthermore, just to, because I want to spotlight Carolyn more, the rental program, I think about the teachers that are they're going back for their master's, they're in graduate program, they may be career switchers, and they are receiving coaching and they're doing their master's program in these schools, these high need schools in Ward 8. And it's really critical because so those folks are not reflected in that data. The folks that are reflected in that data are much more in the conventional pre-service teacher education program where they may have had like one or two courses. They don't have any of that experiential learning. And I think that really shined the light on what we need to do. Right? So great question. Yeah, thanks, Alida.
Yeah, and it's challenging, particularly for the in-service teachers, right? Because they are in the classroom, and we know how well our educators are paid, right? And to ask them to do that additional work, right? And oftentimes it's like compensated, and I can go on and on, but thank you for that. It's really important work. Yeah.
All right. And then if everyone, yeah, thank you so much. Again, just one word, huge congratulations to our award winners, and thank you all for coming.